As I was rushing to an important meeting, I saw a woman on the sidewalk, struggling in the pouring rain, clutching a baby to her chest. Without even stopping to think, I pulled out the keys to my father's place and handed them to her, not realizing how this would come back to haunt me later. It had been a hectic day in Chicago, and I had just spent hours weaving through the Grand Hall at a well-known architecture event. This was one of those prestigious charity galas, aiming to raise funds for affordable housing projects. Some of the country's most respected architects, myself included, had donated designs to help bring these plans to life, giving high society a chance to both give back and, for some, to show off a bit. Although people admired my work, I had not been the same since my young wife's sudden passing, leaving me to care for my aging father on my own. Whispers had started to spread about how I was becoming withdrawn. But to the few who understood loss, my quiet demeanor made sense. At the event, I crossed paths with Lillian, a legendary architect known for her decades of experience and unmatched achievements. She approached me, her gaze both warm and knowing. "Jake, it is always something to see you here," she began with a smile. "I have heard that aside from all your work, you have been taking care of your father. That is admirable." I managed a polite smile and nodded, feeling out of place amidst all the glitz. Noticing my discomfort, she added, "These events can seem pretty shallow, but sometimes they surprise you. So what brought you here tonight, Jake? You do not seem like you came just for the networking." I sighed, a hint of sadness slipping into my smile. "Honestly, I am here more out of duty than anything else. Architecture is not my whole life. I was shaped by experiences far beyond just this career, mostly from my father. He was a simple man with a huge heart who raised me alone. Everything he did for me became a lesson I carry with me." Lillian listened closely, respect etched in her expression. "It is rare to find someone who holds on to those values, especially someone with your success," she said. "Your father must be an incredible man." "He truly is," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. "He did everything he could to support us, fixing things for neighbors, giving private lessons, whatever it took. He always told me, the greatest wealth a man has is not what he owns but what he gives to others." Lillian nodded, clearly moved. "That explains so much about who you are, Jake, and how you handle your life and career. Many here could learn from that." I thanked her, sharing a quick smile. "I am just trying to live in a way that would make him proud." To him, the real architecture of life was about building connections with people, creating spaces filled with compassion and understanding. After the event, I drove home, where my father, now living with me due to his health, was watching his usual nighttime program. Even though illness had slowed him down, his spirit was as vibrant as ever. "How did the event go, son?" he asked, clearly interested. "It went well, even though some people think money makes them gods. But it was a success. I even talked with Lillian about how meaningful our work can be for society." I took a seat next to him. Later, as I helped him get settled for the night, I mentioned my plans. "Dad, I have to head out tomorrow morning for that meeting on the new project. I will have everything arranged here, and Mrs. Martinez said she would stop by to check on you." My father gave me a tender look, his eyes filled with pride. "You are a good son, Jake. Go do what you need to do. I am proud of you." My father had gone through so much. After my mother left us, he had sacrificed everything to raise me, putting all he earned into my education because he believed it was the path to a better life. His determination was the foundation that helped me become who I am today. The next morning, I got up early, preparing myself for the big day. I dressed sharply in a suit fit for the occasion and called the man I would be meeting. "Good morning, Mr. Connor. I am on my way and should be there soon," I told him. As I stepped outside, the rain began to pour heavily. My driver, who knew my routine well, was waiting. "Looks like it is going to be a rough drive, Mr. Jake," he noted, watching me get into the car. With traffic crawling in the neighboring city because of the storm, I stared out at the rain hitting the window, lost in my thoughts about the upcoming meeting. Then, something on the roadside caught my eye, a woman, clearly homeless, holding a newborn close, shielding it from the rain. The sight hit me deeply. "Stop the car," I told the driver. "I need to help that woman." "Mr. Jake," he said cautiously, "you will get soaked, and we have a meeting to get to." "I do not care," I replied. "They need help now." Without waiting, I opened the door and walked into the downpour. I approached her, calling out over the rain, "Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go? You cannot be out here with the baby in this weather." Looking surprised, she shook her head, glancing down at her daughter. "No, we have nowhere," she answered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Without a second thought, I hurried back to the car, grabbed my father's house key from the glove compartment, and returned to her. "My name is Jake," I said quickly. "What is yours?" "Stella," she replied, holding her daughter tightly. "Stella, take this key. It is to my father's house nearby. He is living with me now, so the place is empty. You and your daughter can stay there." I handed her the key, adding, "I am late for a meeting, but my driver will take you there." Soaked and shivering, I got back into the car, signaling my driver to help Stella find shelter. "I'll walk to the meeting," I told the driver, glancing back at the soaked woman and her baby. "Please, take Stella and her child to my father's place. It's just down the road. Stop by the market, pick up whatever they need, food, clothes, diapers, whatever is necessary." My driver, well accustomed to my spur-of-the-moment kindness, nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Mr. Jake, I'll handle everything." After seeing me off, my driver headed back to where Stella stood, huddled under a thin awning with her daughter. "Come on," he said gently. "Do not worry. I will take you to a safe place. Mr. Jake just wants to help you and your baby." But Stella looked at him with a guarded expression, clutching her child tighter. "I do not know you," she said, her voice edged with fear. "I have seen things on TV. I cannot just trust someone like that." Understanding her hesitation, the driver softened his tone, reaching into his wallet to show her some pictures of his own family. "Look, I understand," he said, showing her the photos. "I have kids, too. I have worked with Mr. Jake for years, and he is truly someone who cares about others." Stella glanced at the photos, her cautious gaze flicking between the driver's face and the snapshots. Still wary but beginning to believe this might be a real chance at safety, she finally agreed. Gently, she climbed into the car, keeping her daughter shielded from the rain as the driver took them to Jake's father's house. They made a quick stop at the market first to pick up food and diapers for her baby. Later that afternoon, after a long and productive meeting, I walked out of the building and spotted my driver waiting by the curb. As soon as I settled into the car, I asked, "How did it go with Stella and her child? Did they make it safely to my father's house?" "Yes, Mr. Jake," he replied, but added, "I let her off a bit down the street. It was easier to maneuver the car that way." Surprised by his choice, I gently chided him, "You should have left her right at the door, especially in this rain, and with a little one." I paused, feeling the weight of the day. "It's all right," I added, letting it go. "I will stop by tomorrow to check in on them and make sure they have everything they need." As we drove, my mind kept drifting to Stella and her daughter, feeling a quiet assurance that I had done the right thing by helping them. When I got home, I had barely stepped inside when Mrs. Rose, who helps care for my father, greeted me with a look of mixed relief and surprise. "Mr. Jake," she began, "your father, Mr. Robert, took a spare key to his house and went over there just after you left. He said he wanted to spend a few days there and was feeling a bit restless and better." I was taken aback. "He went alone?" I asked, immediately concerned about his health. "Yes, he did," she replied. "He waited until you were gone because he knew you wouldn't let him go like that. He seemed determined, said he felt well enough to stay on his own for a while." A knot of worry formed in my chest as I thought about what this could mean, especially with Stella and her daughter staying there. Without another word, I turned to the driver and instructed him to take me there immediately. As we sped through the streets, anxiety gnawed at me, every turn in the road intensifying my concern. When we arrived, my heart sank, the front door was wide open, and an ambulance was parked outside. Panic surged as I rushed toward the house, just in time to see my father being carried out on a stretcher. I ran up to the paramedics, my heart pounding. "I'm his son, what happened?" One of the doctors looked at me calmly and explained, "Your father had a stroke, but your wife was here and called us immediately. She saved his life." Relief and gratitude flooded through me as I realized Stella must have been there to help. The terror of what could have happened still lingered, but I was immensely thankful for her presence. I followed as they loaded my father into the ambulance, feeling a fierce determination to stay by his side through this ordeal. After the ambulance left for the hospital, I went back into the house, searching for Stella and her daughter. I found her standing nearby, looking concerned but composed. Trying to calm my nerves, I looked at her with gratitude. "Stella, I don't even know how to begin thanking you for what you did. The doctor thought you were my wife," I added with a faint smile, trying to lighten the moment a little. "There's nothing to thank me for, Mr. Jake," she replied in a soft voice. "I just did what anyone would do. I was just here at the right time." I glanced around and noticed the bags from her recent shopping trip, filled only with basic necessities. "I see you just got the essentials. Please, you did not need to hold back. You could have taken more for you and your daughter," I said, genuinely hoping she felt comfortable enough to accept the help. Stella looked at me, a mixture of appreciation and reluctance in her eyes. "You have already done so much. I didn't want to take advantage of your kindness." For a moment, we stood there in silence, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Finally, I broke the quiet. "Stella, I'd really like to hear more about you and your daughter, if you're willing to share. I would like to understand how you ended up in this situation." Stella took a deep breath, as if deciding whether to open up. She looked at her daughter, then back at me, and began, "I never knew my mother. I grew up with my father, but he was more of a stranger to me. He drank heavily, barely noticing I was there." I listened closely, sensing the strength beneath her calm words. "I always wanted to study," she went on, her eyes distant as she recalled those early days, "but my father wouldn't allow it. I would read in secret after he went to bed, dreaming of a better life." She paused, her expression shifting as she thought back. As time went on, things only got worse. My father's drinking deepened, and I tried to help him, but it was no use. He was a tough man, and I was mostly afraid of him. Taking another breath, she continued, "Then one day, I met someone. He seemed perfect, kind, and for a while, things felt different. Then I found out I was pregnant. I was terrified," Stella confessed, her voice trembling as she recalled the painful memory, "but I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally have a family." Her voice wavered with the weight of her past. "But as soon as he found out I was pregnant, he vanished. I never saw him again. For a while, I hid the pregnancy, but when my father found out," she hesitated, a flash of hurt crossing her face. "He was furious. He would not let me explain and threw me out with nothing." "How did you manage?" Jake asked, his voice full of concern. "I survived by begging," she said quietly. "I lived on the streets, and when my daughter was born, the homeless people around me became my support. I was afraid, wary of everyone and everything, but I had to be strong for her." Jake looked at Stella, recognizing not just the pain in her words but also an incredible resilience. "You are a strong woman, Stella. Your story is one of true courage." She managed a sad smile. "I did not have a choice. Life has not been kind, but I could not give up. I would face it all over again if it meant giving my daughter a chance." Her voice was choked with emotion. I do not know how to thank you for all this. She paused, glancing around the room. When I saw your father's books, I felt like I'd stepped into heaven. I love reading, but I never had access to so many books. Jake smiled softly. You're welcome to read as much as you want, Stella. Consider them yours too. Before he left, he pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. Here's something to help with expenses, he said gently. Stella took the envelope and, feeling its weight, cautiously opened it. Her eyes widened at the amount inside. Jake, this is far too much. I cannot accept it. Please, take it, he insisted with a kind smile. You need it more than I do. Use it to buy clothes, food, whatever you and your daughter need. Tears welled up in her eyes. I do not know how to thank you. You are giving me more than just help, you are giving me hope. For a moment, silence hung between them, and Stella looked at Jake thoughtfully. May I ask, are you married? A shadow passed over Jake's face, and he sighed. He began. My wife, she passed away in an accident, just a month after we got married. It has been 3 years now. Stella put her hand over her mouth, a look of sadness and surprise on her face. I am so sorry, Jake. I had no idea. He shook his head gently. It is all right. It was hard, but I have learned to live with it. The pain never completely goes away, but we find ways to carry on, do we not? She nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of connection through their shared experiences of loss and resilience. Jake stood, picking up his keys. I need to go now, but please, make yourself at home here. And if you need anything at all, just call me. Thank you, Jake, she said sincerely, her gratitude evident. He gave her a sad but warm smile. Take care, Stella. And remember, you are not alone. With those words, he left, leaving Stella with a mix of gratitude, hope, and a sense of belonging she had not felt in a long time. Returning to his own home, Jake's mind was filled with thoughts of Stella's story. The next day, he visited his father in the hospital. Though Mr. Robert was stable, he still required constant care. Sitting beside his father's bed, Jake recounted Stella's story, how she had saved him by calling the ambulance and the incredible challenges she had faced. Listening intently, Mr. Robert's face softened with empathy. You did a wonderful thing, son. Stella sounds like a remarkable woman, full of courage, he said, his voice faint but filled with pride. It is good to know you have grown into such a kind-hearted man. I am grateful every day that I had the strength to raise you alone. They sat quietly for a moment, each reflecting. Then, with a thoughtful look, Mr. Roberts spoke again. Do you think it might be best to bring Stella and the baby to live closer to us? They could stay at our house. I would like to have more life around. And you would not have to go out of your way to check on them. Jake considered the suggestion, and the idea appealed to him. Having Stella and her daughter closer would add warmth to their home, and his father would surely enjoy the company. That is a good idea, Dad, Jake agreed. I will talk to Stella about it. I think it could bring a bit of joy to all of us. His father smiled, visibly pleased by the thought. It would be wonderful to have a child around. The house gets so quiet when you are off working. With this new plan in mind, Jake said goodbye, promising to consider it seriously. As he left, he felt a renewed sense of hope, thinking about the future possibilities for all of them. Later, after a long day working on a major project, Jake drove to the house where Stella was staying, eager to discuss the idea. When he arrived, he found her tidying the living room while her daughter played quietly on the floor. Stella, I have something important to talk to you about, he began, sitting down nearby. She looked at him, curious. What is it, Jake? He took a deep breath, gathering his words. My house, it is big, and since my father fell ill, it has felt very quiet. He loves reading, and I thought, well, since you love reading too, maybe you could keep him company. Plus, if you want to study, he could help you with that. Stella's eyes widened, surprised. Are you saying, you want me and my daughter to live in your house? Jake nodded. Yes. It would mean a lot to both of us to have you there. And it would be amazing to have you and your baby nearby. I think having you and your daughter here would be wonderful for my dad, Jake said, his voice sincere. He would feel less alone, and you would have a safe place to stay, with access to as many books as you could ever want. Stella was silent for a moment, clearly considering the offer. That would be amazing, Jake. I do not know how to thank you. This would be a huge help for me and my daughter, and I would love to have the chance to study more. Relieved, Jake smiled. Then it is settled. Let's do this. I believe it will be good for all of us. Stella smiled back, her face filled with gratitude, and quickly began gathering her and her daughter's belongings. Her heart was full of hope for the new possibilities ahead. When they arrived at Jake's home, Stella could not hide her amazement. Wow, Jake, your house is incredible. You are a talented architect, she exclaimed, looking around in awe. Jake grinned, clearly appreciating her admiration. Thank you, Stella. I hope you and your daughter will feel comfortable here. In the days that followed, a warm bond began to grow between Stella and Mr. Robert, Jake's father. Mr. Robert had an impressive collection of books and eagerly started sharing his favorites with Stella. One day, he picked up a worn, well-loved book and handed it to her. This one was a favorite of mine when I was younger. I think you will enjoy it. Stella took the book, flipping through its yellowed pages. It looks wonderful. Thank you for sharing it with me, Mr. Robert. As Jake watched the connection between them deepen, he decided to release the hired caregiver, as Stella had insisted on looking after Mr. Robert herself. She cared for him with respect and genuine warmth, and Mr. Robert deeply appreciated her and her daughter's company. One afternoon, Stella said to Jake, I really enjoy caring for your father. He has been so kind to me and my daughter. It feels like the least I can do. Jake smiled, nodding. You are already part of the family, Stella. My father and I are both grateful to have you here. As Stella settled into Jake's home, he thought of ways to support her independence as well. One day, while they were talking in the kitchen, he raised the subject. Stella, I have been thinking, Jake began, I would like to pay you a salary. You have been wonderful with my father and around the house, and I think it is only right that you have an income of your own. Stella looked at him, surprised. Jake, that is not necessary. You are already providing a home and everything my daughter and I need. I understand, but it is important to me that you feel financially secure and independent, he insisted. I want you to be able to buy what you need for yourself and your daughter without having to ask. Stella's eyes softened, a mix of gratitude and a hint of sadness showing through. You do not know how much those words mean to me, she said, her voice wavering slightly. For so long, my life was controlled by others, always someone telling me what I could or could not do, where I could go, how I should live. Having the freedom you are offering is something I hardly dared to dream of. Jake listened, understanding deeply, and leaned in with a look of encouragement. I see your strength, Stella, even if you do not see it yet. You are capable of so much more than you realize. Independence starts with small steps, and every decision you make is part of building your new life. Stella sighed, taking in his words. I have always been afraid, she admitted. Afraid of making mistakes, afraid of making choices, because I was always made to feel like I was not capable. But you are right, maybe this is the first step toward feeling truly free. Jake nodded, encouraging her further. Exactly, Stella. And remember, you do not have to do this alone. I am here to support you, but every decision will ultimately be yours. This is a chance to rediscover yourself, to find out what you truly like, what you want for your life and for your daughter. She nodded with newfound determination. I want that. I want my daughter to see me as someone strong and independent, not as someone who is always dependent on others. I want her to grow up knowing she can make her own choices without fear. Jake, thank you for believing in me. Pleased to see her resolve, Jake smiled. All right, then let's start small. How about setting a few simple goals? Maybe opening a bank account or picking out something you have always wanted to buy for you and your daughter. Let each choice be a step toward full independence. From that moment, Jake began paying Stella a regular salary. For the first time in years, she felt what it was like to have financial freedom. She could buy clothes for her daughter, pick out new books, and even save a bit, without the constant feeling of dependence. Over time, Jake and Stella's relationship grew deeper, warmer. Jake adored spending time with Hannah, Stella's daughter, and they often went on walks together. During those moments, Jake would talk about his passion for architecture, and Stella listened intently, soaking up every word. She also devoted herself to reading the books Jake recommended, strengthening the bond between them further. The affection they shared began to shift into something more profound. Stella could feel herself falling for Jake, but she kept her feelings guarded, unsure of his thoughts. One evening, Jake sat with his father on the porch, watching the sunset. Breaking the quiet, he said, "Dad, I think I am falling for Stella. It is the first time in years that I have felt this way, but I am not sure what to do." Mr. Robert, with a knowing smile, looked at his son. "Jake, life is too short to hold back. If you feel this way, you should tell her. You deserve happiness." Jake considered his father's words, hesitating. "Do you really think so? What if she does not feel the same? You will not know unless you try. And from what I see, the way she looks at you says a lot," his father encouraged, the warmth in his voice unwavering. Inspired by his father's advice, Jake decided he would talk to Stella. He needed to know if she felt the same way. With a blend of nervousness and hope, he thought about how he would bring up the subject. That night, after putting Hannah to bed, Stella was in the living room, reading. Jake joined her, sitting down with his heart pounding. After a few moments of comfortable silence, he gathered his courage and spoke softly, "Stella, can we talk? There is something important I want to tell you." She set her book aside, turning to face him with an attentive look. "Of course, Jake. What is on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Jake steadied himself, preparing to share what he felt. "I have been feeling something deeper for you lately," Jake said softly, looking into her eyes. "More than just friendship. You have brought light back into my life and into this home. I care about you and Hannah more than I ever thought I would." Stella's heart raced, both surprised and touched by his words. "Jake, I feel the same. You have been nothing but amazing to us," she replied, her voice trembling. Jake took her hand gently. "Stella, I want to be here for you, not just as a friend, but as someone who truly cares. I would love to be part of Hannah's life, to look after her as if she were my own daughter." Tears welled up in Stella's eyes, moved by Jake's sincerity. "That means so much to me, Jake. Hannah and we already see you as part of our family." From that night forward, their relationship blossomed. Stella began accompanying Jake to social and professional events, though not all reactions were kind. Rumors circulated, some calling her the beggar Jake took in. People would often glance at them with disapproval, whispering behind their backs. But Jake remained unfazed, staying by her side and making Stella feel secure and valued. At one event, an elegant cocktail party in an art gallery, Mrs. Lillian, a prominent figure in Jake's social circle, approached them with a polite smile. "Jake, Stella, it is a pleasure to see you here. I have heard about your relationship and wanted to offer my congratulations," she said, her voice cordial but her gaze steady. "Thank you," Stella replied, though she felt a bit tense under Lillian's scrutinizing gaze. There was something in the way Lillian watched her that made her uneasy, but she maintained her composure. Lillian continued with a curious smile. It is always refreshing to see new faces at these events. Stella, you have a unique air about you. Thank you, Mrs. Lillian, Stella replied politely. Before I forget, I would like to invite you both to a dinner at my home next week, Lillian said, looking between the two of them. It would be lovely to have you over. Jake hesitated, feeling a sense of obligation, though he was not particularly keen on the idea. He looked at Stella, silently seeking her opinion before replying. We would be honored, Mrs. Lillian. Thank you for the invitation. Lillian smiled, seeming pleased with his response. Wonderful. I look forward to it. It will be a delightful evening. Until then, she said before moving away, leaving Jake and Stella alone again. As soon as she left, Jake turned to Stella. I hope it is all right that I accepted the invitation, he said, a bit concerned. Stella nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. It is fine, Jake. I think it will be an interesting experience. Together, they continued to enjoy the event, though the upcoming dinner at Lillian's house lingered in their minds, stirring a mixture of curiosity and caution. The day of the dinner arrived, and as Jake and Stella approached Lillian's grand home, they were struck by its beauty and elegance. Lillian, a renowned architect, had clearly poured her expertise into every corner. The interior was immaculate, blending modern and classic art seamlessly. However, despite the elegance, Stella felt a certain emptiness. The house, for all its grandeur, lacked warmth and felt more like a showcase than a home. What a beautiful house, Mrs. Lillian, Stella commented, trying to conceal her impression of the space's hollow atmosphere. Thank you, Stella, Lillian replied with pride. I put a great deal of effort into every detail. As they chatted, Lillian's gaze lingered on Stella, her expression enigmatic. At one point, she began speaking about her personal life, sharing parts of a painful past. She mentioned hardships she had endured in her youth, leaving both Jake and Stella puzzled about her intentions. Jake, sensing a deeper reason behind Lillian's words, finally asked, Mrs. Lillian, I hope you do not mind my asking, but I am a bit confused. Why did you invite us here tonight? Lillian sighed deeply, as though gathering courage, and stood to retrieve a photo album. She returned, opening it to a photograph of herself from many years ago, visibly pregnant. Jake and Stella looked at the picture, still uncertain of its significance. Where is the child? Jake asked gently, trying to understand. With tears in her eyes, Lillian looked directly at Stella. The child, she is here. It is you, Stella. Stella stared at Lillian, her mind reeling. She looked from the photo to Lillian, struggling to grasp the enormity of the revelation. I am your daughter, she asked, her voice shaking. The news hit like a bombshell, leaving everyone in a state of shock. Jake, equally stunned, looked between the two women, trying to reconcile the information. This is hard to believe, he said, still reeling. Stella never knew her mother. How can you be certain? Stella, barely able to speak, looked at Lillian with wide eyes, unable to formulate words. The idea that the woman sitting across from her could be her mother was something she had never dared to imagine. Lillian, her own tears flowing freely, began to tell her story. When I was young, I met your father. He seemed like a good man, despite his struggles with alcohol. We were together, and I became pregnant. But after you were born, he changed. He became aggressive, and the day we left the hospital, he took you away. He disappeared without a trace. Jake and Stella listened in silence, absorbing the painful story. Lillian continued, I did everything I could to find you. I hired investigators, spent every penny I could, but it was as if you both vanished. No clues, no leads, nothing. Stella felt a surge of mixed emotions, anger over her mother's absence battled with empathy for Lillian's own pain and desperation. So the man who raised me, he took me from you? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of realization. Lillian nodded, her face a mixture of relief and sorrow. Yes, Stella. He took the most precious thing in my life away from me, and I spent every year searching for you. The tension in the room was thick, Stella's mind racing to process the revelation. Still trying to make sense of it all, she looked at Lillian and asked, "But how can you be so sure that I am your daughter? Why did you only find me now?" Lillian took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first saw you with Jake, I felt something, an intuition I could not ignore. And then, I noticed a mark on your hand, a birthmark exactly like mine. That was the last detail I remembered of you before you were taken." She continued, her voice breaking slightly. "After that day, I reached out to an investigator I have trusted for years. I asked him to look into your past. The pieces started to fall into place. Eventually, he found your father. He was drunk on the street, a shadow of the man I once knew. The investigator approached him, offering him a drink, and eventually, he confessed. He told the truth, that he had taken you from me." Lillian's voice shook as she described how he had lived in hiding, keeping Stella's existence a secret to avoid detection. "He did not even make documents for you. He kept you hidden, living on the fringes to avoid leaving any trace that could lead back to me." Stella absorbed each word in stunned silence, a veil lifting on her life that revealed truths she had never known. "He lived a life of fear, hiding, and he dragged me into it," she murmured, understanding the depth of what Lillian was revealing. Jake, looking between Stella and Lillian, could not contain his amazement. "This story, it is almost unbelievable." Stella, her voice thick with emotion, looked at Lillian, trying to form the words. "I never imagined something like this could be part of my life." "It is, a lot to take in," Stella murmured, her voice thick with emotion. With tears in her eyes, Lillian nodded in understanding. "I know, my dear. It is a shock for all of us." She hesitated, then added, "Despite everything he did, I arranged for your father to be taken to a care facility. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he will stay there for the rest of his life." Jake, trying to grasp the depth of Lillian's actions, asked, "You did that for him? After everything he did to you and Stella?" Lillian let out a heavy sigh. "Yes, Jake. Despite everything, he is a sick man who deserves compassion. I spent years filled with anger, but now, with my daughter here in front of me, all I feel is gratitude. I cannot let bitterness linger anymore." Stella looked at Lillian with mixed feelings, gratitude for her kindness, despite the man's actions, and a swirl of confusion about her own relationship with him. "Thank you, Lillian. I am still processing all of this, but I appreciate that you looked after him, even after everything he did. He is still my father." After that night, Stella's life changed profoundly. She began visiting Lillian's home regularly, and the two of them worked to rebuild the relationship they had lost. During one of her visits, they were enjoying tea on Lillian's spacious porch when Lillian asked, "Stella, have you always been interested in studying more?" A hopeful glimmer appeared in Stella's eyes. "Yes, I always dreamed of studying architecture, but I never had the chance." Lillian smiled warmly. "Well, I think it is time to make that dream a reality. I want you to enroll in the best architecture school, and I will take care of everything." Stella was speechless, moved beyond words. "You would do that for me?" I do not know how to thank you," she stammered, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. Lillian reached across the table, holding her daughter's hand. "After all we have lost, it is the least I can do. And there's more, I am building a room here for Hannah. I want to be part of her life, to be there for every milestone." Overcome with emotion, Stella's tears spilled over as she whispered, "That means so much to me, Lillian. Hannah will love having you as her grandmother." As time passed, Stella and Lillian's bond deepened naturally. Stella often visited with Hannah, who filled Lillian's home with laughter and joy, creating a family atmosphere that had long been missing in both their lives. Years passed, and as Stella neared the end of her architecture studies, she reached a significant milestone: graduation day. The ceremony was filled with family, friends, and teachers who had supported her journey. As Stella walked down the aisle toward the stage, a mix of pride and gratitude filled her heart. She scanned the audience, her eyes searching for three special faces: her husband, who had supported her unconditionally, her father-in-law, who had been a constant source of strength, and, of course, Lillian, her biggest champion. When Stella stepped up to the podium to give her speech, she felt a swell of emotion. "Today, I am here not only because of my own efforts but because of the invaluable support of some extraordinary people," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "To my husband, who has always encouraged me to reach for my dreams, to my father-in-law, who welcomed me as a daughter and gave me strength in hard times." Her gaze shifted to Lillian, and she paused, smiling warmly before continuing. "And to my dear mother, Lillian. Mom, you gave me more than just the chance to study, you gave me a home, love, and the family I always wished for." Her words brought tears to Lillian's eyes. Hearing Stella call her Mom was a moment she had dreamed of for so long. She covered her face with her hands, overcome by emotion, feeling a wave of love, gratitude, and fulfillment unlike anything she had ever known. After Stella's speech, as the ceremony concluded, Lillian approached her daughter, away from the crowd. Tears shone in her eyes as she began to speak, her voice thick with emotion. "My dear daughter, for so many years, my heart was incomplete. I always believed this day would come, but to finally see you here, to witness the amazing woman you have become, it feels like a miracle." Stella listened, holding her mother's hands tightly. Lillian continued, "When you were taken from me, my life became a shadow. I fought every day, not only to find you but to keep hope alive. Today, seeing you like this, so strong and radiant, has turned that hope into reality." There was a gentleness in Lillian's voice as she shared memories of the years spent waiting and imagining moments she had missed with her daughter. "I dreamed of holding you, touching your face, sharing laughter and tears with you. I missed so many moments, but now, every tear and every prayer feels worth it. You are my miracle, Stella." With tears streaming down her face, Stella whispered, "Mom, I missed you, even though I did not know who you were. There was always an emptiness, something missing, until today." Lillian nodded, her emotions reflected in her daughter's eyes. "I know, sweetheart. And no matter the years we lost, we will make new memories together. Life has given us a second chance, and I will be here for every step you take." They embraced tightly, a hug that healed years of separation, binding them together. "You have completed my life in ways I never imagined," Lillian whispered. Stella looked at her mother, her heart full. "Mom, you have shown me the true meaning of family and love. I am so grateful for everything." Hand in hand, they left the graduation ceremony, renewed with a profound sense of love and hope for the future. Their story was a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love, a bond that can withstand any distance, any hardship, and any obstacle life may throw their way.